Welcome to a new Team CGC 9.8 video. So a different video today. I wanted to talk about what I like to collect and why. So that'll probably sound like a really broad title, but I wanted to come at it from sort of two different perspectives. The first is why I sort of exclusively stick to CGC 9.8 comics for sort of my generation. So there are a couple reasons for that, so I'll get into that. And also, when you're collecting comics, there's kind of some fundamental areas, I would say, that I would recommend to stick to. So we'll get into sort of all the details about that, like what are the areas that I would really recommend to kind of stick around when you're collecting comics. Because, yeah, the comic book universe, it's an ocean. It is a universe, literally. So big. There's a big temptation to kind of dabble and buy a lot of secondary issues or, issues that just look really cool, but I think what's been shown to work in the past is sticking to those really, really iconic first appearances. I think over the last 30 years, the prices have done really well in those issues, and over the next 30, that'll continue. And, I'm sort of on the record as saying, like, the best way to invest in comics is buying those classic issues from the 1960s and the early 1970s. So many classic first appearances in there that are going to be timeless. Spider-Man, Hulk, Iron Man. Not the later generation there, Wolverine and Punisher, sort of in the later end of that generation. You really just can't go wrong with those books at all. But for me, I really love 1980s and 1990s books. I'm a big nostalgic collector. So even though I have that investment perspective, I'm not necessarily buying the books that I think are 100% the best investments, because otherwise I would be buying those 60s and 70s books for sure. So in those 80s and 90s books that I really like to stick to, I really recommend to stick to CGC 9.8 comics, especially if you have the budget for it and you're sort of coming at it from an investment perspective, like you want to hold these books for a really, really long time and hopefully they go up in value kind of thing. So a couple reasons I mentioned of why I exclusively stick to CGC 9.8 comics. By the 80s and 90s, the first reason, printing really picked up in the 80s and certainly in the early 90s. And another thing, collecting sort of became a thing in the 80s and early 90s as well, where like putting your book in a bag and board was really like important, and again, a lot of them being printed. So that's the first reason. There's just a lot more books out there from this generation, and they're in a lot better shape than certainly relatively compared to the last generation. So I think sticking to the CGC 9.8 makes sense from that perspective. The second reason, I think collectors really, really like to have a sort of like 1 of 400 or a 1 of 200 collector item, or in here like a 1 of 31 Green Lantern 141. So that's a 1 of 31. And this is like 1 of 600 and something. There's 600 and something Incredible Hulk 340s. So I really love that feeling of having that, collector 1 of something collector item. And I think it comes a little bit from my like hockey card background a little bit. I notice, some hockey cards, like it'll be like a Connor McDavid rookie card and only like 400 of them have been printed. And when you look on the back of the card, it's like 32 of 400. And a lot of times those cards are worth a lot of the main sort of superstars, I guess. But so it's, the same deal with comic books. I think collectors really like to have that feeling of like having a 1 of something collector item. And then, CGC 9.8 is kind of the highest grade you can expect to buy. So like I know, there's 9.9s and 10s out there for some books, but it's kind of the one, so you can be kind of confident saying it's a 1 of, 500 or whatever it might be. Whereas if you buy a 9.6 or a 9.4, there's always like higher grade books above it, so you can't, it doesn't become as worth it, I guess. So yeah, you know what? It's not for everyone, but if you're coming at it from an investment perspective and you have like, maybe you sold like 10 or 20,000 worth of your stocks or investment portfolio to buy 80s and 90s comics, then just only buy CGC 9.8 books, high grade books of all classic, key issues and first appearances. So, getting into the areas of, obviously the title here, what I like to collect and why. Getting into some of the areas I like to focus on when I'm collecting, because, again, I mentioned there's a temptation to kind of dabble and want to get a lot of secondary keys and things like that. Whereas if you focus on those iconic classic first appearances in certain areas, I think those books will kind of do better over time, and oftentimes they're just so awesome too. So you get a great pride of ownership from them too. So I broke it down into 4 areas that, I was thinking about my collection, and I even sort of thought of this initially, and I kind of added on another area to sort of my initial thoughts when I first started buying CGC 9.8 comic books. I wanted to sort of stick to these areas, I guess. So number 1 is Marvel. So Marvel, Disney purchased Marvel. It was like over 10 years now they bought Marvel Entertainment there. So with Marvel, you get Spider-Man, X-Men, Wolverine, Hulk, Avengers, Fantastic Four, Daredevil, Punisher, and like even in the 80s, like G.I. Joe and Transformers, I think goes down as like iconic, great areas to collect. And then Deadpool, obviously, in there. So I think just Marvel Comics in general, with the promotion machine of Disney behind it, like there's definitely going to be a couple Marvel movies every year for the next 20, 30 years, for sure. Obviously, there's like the phases they do now, and they got the whole announcement sort of structure kind of set up. So that's going to continue on because Disney has shareholders, and that's how capitalism works. It just keeps going for sure. So I think Marvel superheroes, you almost can't go wrong. I really like Spider-Man, X-Men, Wolverine, Hulk. Just those really, certainly if you're in those 60s and 70s books, Incredible Hulk 181, first appearance of Wolverine. That book's so hot, but it is a book that I would recommend to grab. Like if you like that generation, if you were targeting that generation for investment grade books, it's still one you want to have. Like I know the price has gone up a lot, but if you don't have it now and you want to buy investment grade books from that era, I'd still recommend to get it. So yeah, you know what? That's number 1. Marvel, anything to do with Marvel. I mean, but sticking especially to a lot of those classic heroes, because there are sort of not classic areas of Marvel too. So, but sticking to a lot of the iconic heroes we talked about. Number 2 is Batman. So Batman's kind of my pick of the DC range, as I think being the most sort of having the most cult followed collector base out of sort of DC characters. Certainly for my generation too, in the 80s and 90s, I think. So Batman, I think, is a great, spot to collect in. I think the books are timeless. Including in Batman, I want to include Harley Quinn, Joker, and like classic villains. So there's a lot of like classic villain appearances that you could grab from the 60s and 70s that are really great first appearances. Joker covers in issues, and then in the 90s, the first appearances of Harley Quinn, I think, are just so collectible too. So Batman's number 2. Number 3 is Star Wars. Similar story to kind of Marvel with Star Wars. Disney purchased Lucasfilms, I think it was over 5 years ago now. And I think The Force Awakens, I think, was maybe their first sort of Disney produced Star Wars movie. But there's going to be Star Wars movies for the next 20, 30 years. Very similar situation to Marvel. And Star Wars comics, there's a couple, there's not so many issues to sort of choose from. I know the Dr. Aphra issue is really hot and like a sort of modern generation Star Wars book to want to get. Star Wars number 1, Star Wars 42, first Boba Fett and first Yoda, Star Wars 42. Star Wars number 1 and like the 35-cent version, I believe it is, the really low printed one that certainly if your budget permits, you can go after that. But Star Wars, I think, gonna have that promotion pump behind it for the next 30, 40 years, and you like to see that, and brings on new generations of fans, and then they grow up and want these comics, and the older these comics get, the more sort of, hopefully the value continues to go up. And I mentioned I sort of added an area because when I first started out, I really drilled down. I remember making a list of the 3 sort of, it was like Marvel, Batman, Star Wars. Like those were the sort of areas I wanted to target. And like, again, within Marvel, there's like symbiotes and Spider-Man and Deadpool and X-Men and Hulk. And so, there's a lot of room, a lot of sort of wiggle room. But those were the 3 I started with from when I first started CGC 9.8 collecting. I wanted to drill down things to buy. 4th one I added, though, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I think, obviously there's the first print of the first issue that's so wanted by collectors, and there was like only a couple thousand of them printed, I believe. So that's, if budget permits, that's really the one to go after. You got the second and third prints of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles #1, which are great. I think a really high grade second or third print Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles #1 is like a sweet collector item. Like a CGC 9.8 of like a second or third print, I think would be an awesome book to have. There's also these Jennika comics with the first appearance of Jennika and when Jennika becomes a Ninja Turtle, the first female Ninja Turtle. Still a modern book, and these are some other sort of newer Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle key issues that I think will kind of help the brand. And, if you're still thinking about the 80s a little bit with Ninja Turtles, there's like the second and third issues are cool. And there's like the series of, there's like Raphael and Leonardo #1 and Raphael #1. Those limited series of each turtle were really cool too. Yeah, so, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle, maybe not as many sort of, obviously as Marvel, the key issue selection in Marvel Comics is so huge, but a little bit less to choose from in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. But I think with how well the first print Ninja Turtles #1 has done, and there's still a lot of Ninja Turtles movies, and I think it's a really iconic brand with great art, and Kevin Eastman's still doing the Turtles books, which I think is awesome too. So yeah, the 4 sort of areas that I would stick around when I'm collecting. And, for the most part too, I wanted to make a point that, I think over 75% of your collection should be these like iconic books. So every now and then, you want to buy something weird, different. Like even for me, this book I brought out not by accident, Green Lantern 141. Not really on my like iconic list, but still there's only 31 in the world in the CGC 9.8. Really love George Perez, big fan of his, and I like this cover. And Green Lantern's kind of like my sort of nostalgia pick for the DC universe, so I wanted to get like 1 or 2 Green Lantern books, and that was one of them. But for the most part, most of my collection is similar to Hulk 340. This is the second time Hulk and Wolverine fought after the first appearance of Wolverine. Classic Todd McFarlane cover, classic moment in comics. Yeah, so that's like a really good example of a classic book that you would want to make sort of over 75% of your comic book collection, something like this. Okay, yeah, you know what? I did want to talk about this because I was thinking about it, and I thought, even for me, I think I've probably bought about 10 or 20 too many sort of secondary type of issues that are about $100 in the last 2 years in the CGC 9.8. Whereas if I just sort of took all that money and pooled it together, I would probably be able to buy like a couple more Hulk 340s, and that would probably be the more savvy way to go when you're collecting. So yeah, I thought I'd make a video of it and hash it out, because yeah, sort of a broad topic, I think, like what do I like to collect and why. Just just wanted to be really broad about it. But I think over time, if you do stick to the iconic characters and iconic first appearances, and don't get too eclectic with some of these other up and coming maybe key issues, but and just most of your funds being put toward those iconic issues, I think is something you probably won't regret. I know I have 4 CGC 9.8 Hulk 340s, and definitely when I bought my 4th one, I was like, do I really need this? And yeah. But since seeing some of the prices and just some of the fervor that the popularity of the issue, and some fans just love the issue so much, and I love the issue so much, so it's great to kind of share that with people, so you get that out of it too. But yeah, a lot of times I think it is better to grab those investment grade, obvious, classic books rather than getting those secondary key issues. So yeah, I just wanted to drill down on that and get into some of the details a little bit too. So hopefully, yeah, you got a couple tips from the video here from me blabbering on a bit. But if you haven't already, I would invite you to join the team and subscribe to Team CGC 9.8. Hit the bell, get all our latest notifications. Add me on Instagram and Twitter too. I got all the links in the description below for all that. But yeah, thanks for watching today. A bit of a different video today, not like a countdown or anything, but yeah, you know what? Hopefully there was some good points to be made in there, and I think yeah, if I think over time, again, it will pay to kind of stick to those classic, iconic moments in comics and first appearances rather than being too nitpicky and eclectic and trying to pick up, some of these issues that not too many people care about, for lack of kind of a better word. So thank you very much for watching today, though. And yeah, I really appreciate all the comments and everything. And I've been having some internet issues the last few days, so I haven't been able to kind of do the consistent videos that I like, but yeah, we'll be at. I know Wednesday I'm getting a tech guy, and I'm getting new internet, so that'll be good on Wednesday. So certainly, hopefully by Wednesday, Thursday, I'll be right back up and running at 100%. But thank you very much for watching today. I'll see you on the next one.